this, we are joined by DA interim leader, that is John Steenhuisen. Thank you so much for your time, John. I mean, like I mentioned before, I've also been exposed on social media to a number of videos dehumanizing, of course, watching South Africans at the hands of the army or even the SAPS doing frog jumps, you know, some being assaulted. But before we get into this WhatsApp number and what its aim and intention is, how many have been brought to your attention?
Well, when we opened the line and launched it yesterday, we had 40 indicators on the WhatsApp line of people who were reporting incidents that had taken place. Obviously, what we need to do is to make sure that these are bona fide interactions and to make sure that they're then forwarded on to the relevant authorities to be dealt with.
And Mr. Steenhuisen, what is the pattern that you are picking up from those? Are there many that are coming from interactions of the public with the SAPS, or many coming through the SANDF's deployment?
Well, it's a variety of security services. There's even some incidences where you've got various Metro Police officers who are doing these types of activities. Of course, you know, I want to be very clear. I don't support people breaking the regulations of the lockdown. But if we are going to enforce the regulations of the lockdown, they must be done in a manner that is fair and consistent with the rule of law and the Bill of Rights, which still governs South Africa. It hasn't been suspended, as a certain member of Parliament said earlier this week. The Bill of Rights remains intact, and it's important that we have a security services that adhere to the proper rules of engagement in dealing with communities out there.
Yeah. Now, the World Health Organization has constantly been, you know, warning against fake news at this time of coronavirus. This not just only when it comes to information perpetuated around, you know, COVID-19, but also different behaviors that we're seeing in videos circulating on social media. So I suppose my question to you is, how then are you able to filter through some of these complaints to ensure that they are accurate, they are credible sources, and which are worthy of further investigation?
Well, obviously, we'd rather err on the side of caution. And so where there's a bona fide case, we will escalate it to the independent police inspectorate division or the military ombudsperson or to a relevant municipal council where it is appropriate. But I think it's important in times like this that we do safeguard civil liberties. It's very easy in times like this for authoritarianism to set in. And then when we exit dangerous times like this, the temporary tends to become the permanent. We must remember we are a constitutional democracy. Citizens do have rights, and those rights need to be upheld even in unusual times as we find ourselves in during COVID-19.
Are you able, Mr. Steenhuisen, just from, you know, a political perspective, read the complexion and demographic character of some of these incidents? I was making the example earlier on with an expert that we were talking to, that in the area where I live, and it's not particularly affluent, but the likelihood of me being shot at with rubber bullets is frankly zero at the moment. But if I lived in Alexandra Township, the chances that I would be going to get bread simply because I'm walking and I'm not driving, and I then get shot by police with rubber bullets without asking questions, is high. So are you able to talk to that element of it? Does it disturb you?
Yes, it does disturb me, because I think that there is very much a pattern where this is the type of behavior that's been meted out to citizens who may not necessarily have the access to lawyers and to the criminal justice system the way in other communities do. And I think it is a function of the inequality that still exists in South Africa, which we've got to grapple with on a daily basis. So I definitely think that these type of jackboot mentality is being perpetrated on people who maybe are not that au fait with what their rights are as citizens. And certainly the scenes that we've seen of people being forced to roll around in the dirt, people being forced to perform humiliating and degrading exercises or put themselves into poses to the mirth and amusement of other people around them is really generally being meted out in communities that are more deprived of opportunity. And you've mentioned Alexandra, but then we've seen in Melville the shootings at nurses. We've seen in Joburg some journalists who were caught up in the crossfire in a relatively urban area. So I think that the message that's got to go out there is that this type of behavior is not acceptable, and it's also counterproductive, because you only subjugate a population to a certain degree before they start fighting back. What we don't want in South Africa is war on the streets during a time like this. So I think there needs to be cooperation and partnership. Cooperation on behalf of the citizens, but also I think there needs to be a partnership with policing, and it needs to be done in a way which I think sensitizes communities to why it is important to stay at home, but also understanding the circumstances that some people don't have access to long-term freezers at home. So people don't have the financial wherewithal to go and stock up on food. That means they don't have to leave the house for a few days. There are far too many South Africans living from hand to mouth every day, and to deprive them of the opportunity to go and get a square meal for the day, I think is wrong. And I think there does need to be some sympathy there. But people should not be willy-nilly breaking the regulations or pushing the patients and testing the regulations. I think that people should be doing their best to get to the shops and get home as quickly as possible, and to try and avoid any form of confrontation.
Just a quick one, Dumi. I know we are completely out of time.
I also had a quick one.
Just on the issue of oversight over the work of the SANDF. I know that with police we have the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, but it seems we are finding ourselves more and more having to turn to the military, Mr. Steenhuisen, and asking them in terms of the laws of the country to assist the SAPS. Is there a gap there by way of accountability and oversight for those, and should we close that gap given that we are having to do this more and more? Just recently it was in the Western Cape over gang violence.
Well, I think there is an institution in the military, and it's one we've been liaising with, and they've been very helpful in dealing with some of the complaints we've sent through already, and that's a military ombudsman who's responsible for policing conduct of members of the SANDF. But I think it does speak to the fact that we do have a shortage of police officers in the country. We have a very poor police-to-population ratio, which is why increasingly we're seeing the military being brought in to assist the SAPS in performing policing functions. Obviously, it's not an ideal situation, but given where we find ourselves in with COVID-19 now, these are extraordinary times, and we obviously need to get as much people in as possible to assist with policing the regulations, but it must be done within the confines and bounds of the law, our Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, and as you're talking right now, I mean, we do definitely have that particular WhatsApp number with which South Africans can just send their number to 076 977 9324, and that email address, which is reportpoliceabuse@da.org.za. But two questions for you briefly. First being that, do you allow for anonymous tip-offs, allow for anonymous complaints to be reported, but also if South Africans don't have access to data at this time, to email or WhatsApp, what's the alternative?
Well, I think that we prefer to do it with people who are able to come forward, because what you want to do is be able to build a case. It's very hard to build a case if you don't have a complainant. So ideally, we would like people to put a name and details to the complaint. Secondly, if people don't have access, IPID had got a toll-free number, which I believe people can phone, or alternatively, make contact with your local ward councillor or public representative to assist you in lodging the complaint. I think that would be the best way to, if you don't have access to data or on that.
All right, John Steenhuisen, the interim leader of the DA, joining us there and talking about a new WhatsApp line and an email address that they've set up to allow people to report instances of police and military abuses during the lockdown.